The neighbor's SUV was halfway buried in what used to be David's front lawn, steam rising from the concrete tomb that had swallowed her wheels. Karen's face pressed against the driver's window, her perfectly manicured nails scraping desperately at the glass as she realized the gray sludge wasn't mud, it was cement. Fresh cement. And it was hardening fast. David stood in his doorway, garden hose in hand, watching 20 years of torment finally come to an end. But as Karen's eyes met his through the windshield, he saw something that made his blood run cold. She was smiling. David Chen had been awake for 37 hours straight. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass of his kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint his destroyed lawn in shades of amber and gold. What had once been a pristine carpet of Kentucky bluegrass now resembled a battlefield, deep tire ruts carved through the earth like wounds, chunks of sod scattered across the concrete driveway like fallen soldiers. She did it again, he whispered. To the empty house. The coffee maker gurgled behind him, but David couldn't turn away from the window. Not yet. He needed to see the full extent of the damage in the morning light. Karen Morrison's silver Escalade had torn through his yard sometime after midnight, leaving a trail of destruction that stretched from the sidewalk to his front porch. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th time. It was the 100th. David had been counting. His phone buzzed against the granite countertop. A text from his daughter Sarah, away at college. Dad saw the Ring camera notification. Again. Call the police this time. Please. He'd stopped calling the police after the 5th incident. Officer Martinez had been sympathetic but clear, without witnesses or video evidence of Karen actually driving through the yard, there was nothing they could do. The security cameras David had installed captured the aftermath but never the act itself. Karen was too smart for that. She knew exactly where his blind spots were. The front door opened with a creak that made David's jaw clench. Only one person had a key to his house. Jesus Christ, David. His brother Marcus stepped into the kitchen, work boots caked with mud. I came as soon as I got your message. How bad is it? See for yourself. Marcus joined him at the window, letting out a low whistle. That's worse than last time. Way worse. She's escalating. David's voice was flat, drained of emotion. Started with just cutting through the corner when she was late for work. Now she's doing donuts. Donuts. David pointed to a circular pattern of torn earth near his mailbox. 3 perfect circles. She sat there spinning her tires for fun. Marcus shook his head, his carpenter's hands clenching into fists. That's it. I'm going over there. No. David grabbed his brother's arm. That's what she wants. She's been trying to provoke me for months. One complaint to the HOA about threatening behavior, and I'm the one who gets fined. So what's your plan? Let her turn your yard into a dirt track. David didn't answer. He couldn't. Because the truth was, he'd been thinking about Karen Morrison's death for weeks now. Not planning it, he wasn't a killer. But imagining it. Dreaming about it. Waking up disappointed that she was still breathing next door. 20 years. 20 years of escalating warfare between their 2 houses on Maple Street. It had started innocently enough, a property line dispute over a shared fence. But Karen had a gift for turning minor disagreements into blood feuds. She'd filed complaints about his dog barking, he didn't have a dog. She'd called the city about his excessive Christmas decorations, 3 strings of lights. She'd reported him for running an illegal business, he worked from home as a freelance accountant. Each victory had emboldened her. Each defeat had eaten away at David's soul. She's trying to force me to sell, he said finally. Tank the property value, make my life hell until I give up and move. Why? Because she wants to expand. Buy my lot, tear down the house, build some monstrosity with a circular driveway. Marcus studied his brother's face. How do you know that? Because she told me. 2 weeks ago, right after the last incident. Said she'd make me an offer I couldn't refuse. David's laugh was bitter. Like she's some kind of mob boss. David. Marcus's voice carried a warning. "What are you thinking?" Before David could answer, a car door slammed outside. Both men turned to see Karen Morrison strutting across her perfect lawn in a pink jogging suit, her bleached hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She paused at the property line, hands on her hips, surveying her handiwork with obvious satisfaction. Then she looked directly at David's kitchen window and waved. "That's it." David pushed past his brother, heading for the front door. "David, don't," but he was already outside, crossing the ruined lawn in quick strides. Karen stood her ground, that familiar smirk playing across her lips. "Morning, neighbor," she called out, her voice sickly sweet. "Lovely day, isn't it? You're going to pay for this." David's voice was low, controlled. "Every blade of grass. Every flower. Prove it." Karen's smile widened. "Prove I did anything wrong? I have cameras that show tire tracks. Could be anyone. Could be kids joyriding. Could be a drunk driver who swerved to avoid hitting a cat." She shrugged. "Not my problem. You can't secure your property." David felt something crack inside his chest. A hairline fracture that had been building for 2 decades suddenly split wide open. "You want to play games?" "I'm not playing anything, David. I'm just living my life. If that happens to inconvenience you." She gestured at the destroyed yard. "Well, maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable to your needs." "My needs?" "Somewhere quiet. Peaceful. Like a retirement community. I hear they have lovely gardens there. Pre-maintained. No muss, no fuss." The crack in David's chest spread to his throat. He could feel Marcus behind him, could hear his brother's sharp intake of breath. But all he could see was Karen's face, twisted with malicious glee. "I'm 53 years old," he said quietly. "Exactly." Karen's eyes glittered. "Perfect age for a nice, quiet community. I could even help you find one. I know an excellent realtor." "You want me gone?" "I want what's best for everyone." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "This neighborhood is changing, David. Evolving. People like you, well, you're becoming obsolete. People like me. People who cling to the past. Who can't adapt. Who stand in the way of progress." Her smile never wavered. "I'm offering you a chance to leave with dignity. But if you insist on being stubborn." She gestured again at the ruined lawn. "There are other ways to motivate you." David stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned around and walked back to his house without saying another word. "David." Marcus followed him inside. "What just happened out there?" David moved to the kitchen cabinet above the refrigerator, pulling out a dusty bottle of bourbon. He poured 2 fingers into a coffee mug and drank it in one swallow. "David. She's not going to stop." He poured another drink. 20 years of this and she's not going to stop until I'm gone. So call a lawyer. Sue her. Fight back. With what money? You know what lawyers cost. And she'd just drag it out, make it worse. David set down the mug, his hands surprisingly steady. "No. She wants to escalate." "Fine. Let's escalate." "What does that mean?" David walked to the window, looking out at the destruction. In the growing daylight, it looked even worse. 2 decades of careful landscaping, destroyed in a single night. "It means I'm done being the victim. David, she wants to drive through my yard. I'll give her something to drive through." He turned to face his brother, and Marcus took a step back. There was something in David's eyes that hadn't been there before. Something cold and calculating. "What are you planning?" "I'm planning to fix my lawn." David's smile was thin and sharp. "Permanently." That afternoon, David made 3 phone calls. The first was to Henderson's Concrete Supply. The second was to Elite Landscaping Services. The third was to his insurance company. By evening, he had everything he needed. Everything except the perfect opportunity. He didn't have to wait long. At 11:47 p.m., David's security system chimed. Motion detected in the front yard. He crept to the window, careful not to turn on any lights. Karen's Escalade was idling at the curb, her silhouette visible behind the wheel. She was waiting. David smiled in the darkness. He'd been waiting too. Karen gunned the engine and turned into his driveway, but instead of stopping, she veered onto the grass. The heavy SUV tore through the temporary fencing he'd installed that morning, sending orange plastic mesh flying in all directions. She was making another run at his flower beds. David reached for his phone, but not to call the police. He opened the app for his sprinkler system, the new one he'd had installed that afternoon. The one connected to something much more interesting than water. Karen's SUV carved a wide arc through the center of his yard, headlights dancing across the windows of his house. She was driving slowly, methodically, making sure to hit every remaining patch of grass. David waited until she was in the perfect position, centered in the yard, equidistant from all four corners, and tapped his phone screen. The sprinklers activated with a mechanical whir. But instead of water, they sprayed quick-setting concrete. Karen's brake lights flared as the first gray jets hit her windshield. She tried to accelerate, but the heavy mixture was already coating her tires, her wheel wells, the undercarriage. David watched through the concrete-splattered windshield as she held it up, recording everything. His face. His garden hose. The gray sludge that was rapidly hardening around her vehicle like a modern-day tar pit. "Hello, 911. Karen's voice was crystal clear despite the glass barrier between them. "I need help. My neighbor has trapped me in my car with some kind of chemical. I can't get out. I think he's trying to kill me." The words hit David like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, the hose slipping from his numb fingers. Water splashed across the concrete, but it was too late. The mixture was already setting, turning from liquid gray to solid stone. "Please. Hurry," Karen continued, her voice perfectly calibrated with just the right amount of terror. "He's been threatening me for weeks. I have it all documented. I'm sending you the video now." David's mind raced. Video evidence. Documentation. She'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Every incident, every confrontation, every moment of his growing rage, she'd been recording it all. "David." Marcus's voice came from behind him. "What the hell is going on?" David turned to see his brother standing in the doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. "You called him," he whispered. Karen's smile widened. "I called everyone who needed to know." The first police cruiser arrived within minutes, followed by a fire truck and 2 ambulances. Red and blue lights strobed across the quiet suburban street, casting everything in hellish hues. Windows lit up in neighboring houses as residents emerged to witness the spectacle. Officer Martinez stepped out of the lead cruiser, his face grim. "Mr. Chen, I need you to step away from the vehicle." "This isn't what it looks like," David said, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Now." David raised his hands and backed toward his house, leaving wet footprints on the concrete that was already beginning to crack and shift as it dried. The fire department was setting up equipment, preparing to cut Karen free from her automotive tomb. "She did this on purpose," David said to Martinez. "She drove through my yard. Again. I was just what? Trying to bury her alive." Martinez's hand rested on his service weapon. "Do you have any idea how many felonies you've just committed? She's been terrorizing me for 20 years. And now you're terrorizing her." Martinez nodded to another officer, who began unrolling crime scene tape. "This is attempted murder, Mr. Chen. Maybe kidnapping. Definitely assault with a deadly weapon. A deadly weapon. Whatever you sprayed on that car could have killed her. Chemical burns, asphyxiation, it's just concrete mix. Just concrete mix." Martinez stared at him. "You tried to bury your neighbor in concrete, and you think that's a defense?" David's legs gave out. He sank onto his front steps, watching as the fire department brought out the jaws of life. The hydraulic spreader bit into the door frame of Karen's Escalade with a metallic shriek that made his teeth ache. 20 minutes later, they had her free. Karen emerged from the vehicle like a conquering hero, her pink jogging suit somehow still pristine despite her ordeal. She played the victim perfectly, trembling hands, wide eyes, voice shaking with just the right amount of trauma. "Thank you," she whispered to the paramedics. "I thought I was going to die in there." We need to get you checked out at the hospital," one of them said. "Possible chemical exposure, shock." "I'm fine." "Really? I just want to go home." She looked directly at David as she said it, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. The terror disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. "I just want this nightmare to be over." Martinez approached David with handcuffs. "David Chen, you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent." The words washed over him like white noise. David watched Karen give her statement to another officer, her performance Oscar-worthy in its sincerity. She had photos on her phone, dozens of them, showing the progressive damage to David's yard over the past month. But in her version, she was the innocent victim of a neighbor's escalating paranoia. "He's been making threats," she told the officer, "saying he was going to make me pay for driving through his yard." "But officer, I've never driven through his yard. These photos show storm damage, maybe kids with dirt bikes. He's been obsessing over me, blaming me for everything wrong in his life." "What about the security cameras?" the officer asked. "What about them? Show me one video of me driving through his property." "Just one." Karen's voice was steady, confident. "You can't, because it doesn't exist." David's mouth fell open. The cameras? All his expensive security cameras, installed specifically to catch Karen in the act. Why hadn't he thought to check them? "Marcus," he called to his brother. "The cameras. Check the footage." Marcus was already on his phone, pulling up the security app. His face went white. "David, there's nothing here." "What do you mean nothing?" "The cameras were offline. All of them. Since yesterday morning." Karen's smile was radiant. "Such a shame when technology fails us, isn't it?" The pieces clicked into place in David's mind. The timing of her attack, the perfect positioning in his yard, the way she'd been prepared with her phone recording everything. She'd disabled his security system, then driven through his property knowing he'd have no proof of her guilt. She'd turned his own trap against him. "You planned this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I planned nothing," Karen replied sweetly. "I was simply defending myself against an unstable neighbor who's been harassing me for months." Martinez tightened the handcuffs. "You can discuss this with your lawyer, Mr. Chen." As they led him to the police cruiser, David caught sight of his reflection in the car window. The man staring back was hollow-eyed and defeated, nothing like the righteous avenger he'd imagined himself to be. He'd been outmaneuvered by a woman in a pink jogging suit who'd turned his 20 years of suffering into her greatest victory. But as the cruiser pulled away from Maple Street, David noticed something that made his blood run cold. Karen was walking toward his house. She had Marcus's keys. "Wait," David said to Martinez. "She's going inside my house. You have to stop her." "Why?" "She's the victim here. Maybe she needs to use your bathroom, clean up." "She's not a victim." She's what? Going to plant evidence. Steal something." "Mr. Chen, you just tried to murder the woman. Right now, she could burn your house down and half the neighborhood would call it justice." David twisted in his seat, trying to keep Karen in sight. She'd disappeared through his front door, but lights were coming on throughout the house. His house. His sanctuary. "What's she looking for?" he muttered. Martinez glanced in the rearview mirror. "Maybe she's looking for proof of your harassment. Threatening letters, photos of her house, plans for tonight's attack." "I don't have any of that." "Really? No obsessive documentation of your feud?" No stalker wall covered in pictures of your neighbor. David's silence was answer enough. That's what I thought. The police station was a blur of fluorescent lights and institutional beige. David was processed, fingerprinted, and thrown into a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. His one phone call went to a criminal defense attorney who quoted him a retainer fee that would drain his savings account. "This is bad," the lawyer said. "Video evidence of you trapping someone in concrete. That's attempted murder, easy conviction. You're looking at 15 to 20 years. She set me up." "Prove it." "I can't." "She's too smart." "Then you're fucked." The lawyer's bluntness was almost refreshing. "Best I can do is plead it down to aggravated assault. Maybe get you 5 to 7 if you're lucky." David hung up the phone and stared at the concrete walls of his cell. The irony wasn't lost on him, trapped in a box of his own making, just like he'd tried to trap Karen. But Karen had escaped her box. And David was beginning to suspect that had been the plan all along. At 3 a.m., a guard brought him a message. Karen Morrison had dropped all charges. What? David bolted upright on his narrow bunk. What does that mean? Means you're free to go. Victim decided not to press charges. But why? The guard shrugged. Lady said she forgives you. Said. You've been through enough. David was released into the pre-dawn darkness with his clothes, his wallet, and a growing sense of dread. A taxi dropped him at the corner of Maple Street, and he walked the final block to his house in silence. The front door was unlocked. David stepped inside, his hand instinctively reaching for the light switch. The electricity was off. Cut at the main breaker, probably. He fumbled for his phone's flashlight and swept the beam across his living room. It was empty. Not just empty, stripped. Every piece of furniture gone. Every picture, every book, every personal possession that had made this house a home. The bare walls stared back at him like accusers. David moved through the house in mounting horror. Kitchen, empty. Dining room, empty. His home office, where he'd spent 20 years building his accounting practice, empty except for a single piece of paper on the floor. He picked it up with trembling hands. A purchase agreement. For his house. Sold to one Karen Morrison for the sum of $1. His signature was perfect. David sank to his knees in the empty room, the paper clutched in his fist. She'd had access to his house for hours while he was in jail. Access to his files, his documents, his entire life. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown. David spent the next 3 days living in his car. He parked it in the Walmart lot across town, far enough from Maple Street to avoid the curious stares of neighbors who'd watched him get arrested. Far enough from Karen's triumphant smile. But not far enough from the crushing weight of his destroyed life. On the fourth morning, Marcus found him. Jesus, David. His brother climbed into the passenger seat, wrinkling his nose at the smell of fast food and unwashed desperation. You look like hell. Feel worse. David's voice was a rasp. He hadn't spoken to another human being in 72 hours. I've been calling you. Phone's dead. Can't afford to replace it. Marcus studied his brother's hollow face. The house I drove by yesterday. There's a moving truck in the driveway. She's moving in. David laughed, but it came out broken. Probably redecorating. Pink curtains, maybe. Match her jogging suit. David, this is insane. You can't sell a house for $1. There are laws, there are also forged documents. And she had hours in my house while I was in jail. Hours to find everything she needed. David pulled out a crumpled paper from his jacket pocket. Power of attorney. Signed 6 months ago, apparently. Gives her full control over my assets in case of mental incapacity. Marcus stared at the document. Mental incapacity. 3 psychiatrist evaluations. All saying I'm a danger to myself and others. All dated from last month. David's smile was bitter. Funny thing about digital records, they can be altered. Backdated. Made to look like whatever story you want to tell. This is fraud. Identity theft. You can fight this. With what money? What lawyer? I've got $200 in my checking account and a car that needs an oil change. David leaned back against the headrest. She didn't just take my house, Marcus. She took everything. Savings, retirement, business accounts. All legally transferred to her care while I was having my mental breakdown. There has to be something we can do. There is. David reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a manila folder. I've been doing some research. Marcus opened the folder and immediately wished he hadn't. Dozens of newspaper clippings, printed articles, and handwritten notes filled the pages. All about Karen Morrison. All painting a picture that made David's blood run cold. She's done this before, David said quietly. 6 times. 6 different neighbors, 6 different cities. Always the same pattern. Marcus picked up a yellowed newspaper clipping from Phoenix. The headline read, "Local man dies in apparent suicide after losing home to neighbor." Below it, a photo of a middle-aged man who looked disturbingly like David. Robert Hastings, David said. Lived next door to Karen in Arizona. Started with property disputes, escalated to harassment, ended with him losing his house and jumping off a bridge. David. Portland. Same story. Martin Webb, age 51. Lost his house to Karen after being arrested for stalking. Found dead in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning. Marcus flipped through more clippings. Dallas. Seattle. Denver. Atlanta. Each story was variations on the same theme: middle-aged man, property dispute, escalating conflict, mysterious transfer of assets, and a tragic ending. She's not just a neighbor from hell, David whispered. She's a predator. A serial killer who uses the legal system instead of a knife. This is Marcus struggled for words. This is insane. How is she not in prison? Because she's brilliant. Every death looks like suicide. Every property transfer appears legal. She finds isolated men, drives them to the breaking point, then swoops in to claim their assets when they snap. But why you? Why here? David pointed to a real estate listing in the folder. My house sits on a double lot. Prime development. Property. Worth $3 million if you tear it down and build luxury condos. He laughed bitterly. She told me she wanted to expand. I thought she meant into my yard. She meant into my life. Marcus set down the folder, his hands shaking. We have to go to the police. And tell them what? That I think my neighbor is a serial killer who uses legal documents instead of poison. They'll lock me up for psychiatric evaluation. Which, coincidentally, is exactly what she wants. Then what do we do? David was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached under his seat and pulled out a small digital recorder. We get proof. How? She's not done with me yet. This isn't about money anymore, it's about the game. She gets off on destroying people, watching them crumble. And I'm not crumbling the way she wants me to. Marcus stared at his brother. You're talking about baiting her. I'm talking about giving her what she wants. Making her think she's won completely. And when she gets cocky, when she starts gloating, you record her confession. Exactly. David, this is insane. She's already destroyed your life. What more can she do? David's smile was cold. She can try to kill me. Like she killed all the others. That evening, David drove back to Maple Street. Karen's Escalade was in his driveway, her driveway now gleaming under the streetlights. She'd had the concrete removed, the yard professionally landscaped. It looked better than it had in years. David parked across the street and walked to the front door. His key no longer worked, but the doorbell did. It played a cheerful melody that made his stomach turn. Karen answered wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of wine. David's wine, from his cellar. David. She seemed genuinely delighted to see him. I was wondering when you'd come home. This isn't my home anymore. Of course it is. You're always welcome here. She stepped aside, gesturing him in. I've made some improvements. What do you think? David stepped into his former living room and felt his world tilt. The furniture was his. Pieces he'd thought were stolen were arranged exactly as they'd been before. His books were on the shelves. His photos hung on the walls. Even his coffee mug sat on the kitchen counter, half full and still warm. I don't understand. I never took anything, Karen said, settling into his recliner. I simply moved it to storage while the house was being cleaned. Professional movers are so much more efficient than police evidence teams. You had me arrested. I had you helped. You were clearly having a breakdown. The concrete incident was just the final symptom of a much deeper problem. David's hand found a recorder in his pocket. What problem? Obsession. Paranoia. The inability to accept that your life wasn't going according to plan. Karen sipped her wine. You blamed me for everything wrong in your world. Your failed marriage, your struggling business, your daughter who never calls. I became the focus of 20 years of accumulated rage. You drove through my yard. I never drove through your yard, David. You have no proof because it never happened. What you have is a mental illness that made you believe I was persecuting you. The other cities. The other men. Robert Hastings, Martin Webb. Karen's smile widened. You've been doing research. Good. I was hoping you would. The casual admission hit David like a physical blow. You killed them. I helped them find peace. Just like I'm helping you. She stood up, moving to the window. Do you know what all those men had in common? They were stuck. Trapped in lives. They hated, unable to move forward, unable to let go. I simply provided the catalyst they needed. You drove them to suicide. I gave them a choice. They could accept their new reality and find a way to be happy, or they could choose to end their suffering. Most chose the latter. David's blood ran cold. Most? Robert Hastings was different. He fought back. Tried to expose me, just like you're doing now. Karen turned from the window, her eyes bright with memory. He broke into my house one night. Had this whole plan to record me confessing. Sound familiar? David's hand tightened on the recorder. Of course, when the police found him on that bridge, he was ranting about serial killers and conspiracy theories. Classic signs of paranoid schizophrenia. Very tragic. You pushed him. I didn't have to. He jumped all by himself. They usually do when they realize how completely they've been outmaneuvered. David took a step backward. You're insane. I'm efficient. Do you know how much money I've made buying distressed properties from desperate men? How much satisfaction I've gotten from watching bullies and misogynists get exactly what they deserve. I'm not a bully. Aren't you? 20 years of passive-aggressive warfare. Property line disputes. Noise complaints. You've been trying to control me since the day I moved in. The only difference between you and my other neighbors is that you're too stubborn to die. David's back hit the wall. What do you want? I want you to choose. Karen set down her wine glass and walked toward him. Door number 1, you accept that this is my house now. You find a nice apartment somewhere, start over, and we pretend none of this ever happened. I'll even give you a good reference. And door number 2. You keep fighting. Keep trying to prove I'm some kind of criminal mastermind. Keep digging into my past, harassing my associates, making yourself look increasingly unstable. Her smile was radiant. And when you finally snap completely, when you come at me with a knife or a gun or whatever weapon your deteriorating mind convinces you to use, I'll be ready. With cameras rolling and witnesses watching. David's mouth went dry. You're setting me up. I'm giving you a choice. The same choice I gave all the others. Karen was close enough now that he could smell her perfume. Choose wisely, David. Because this is the last time I'm going to be this generous. David looked around the room, his room, Phil. David didn't resist when they cuffed him. He sat quietly in the back of the cruiser while Karen gave her statement, playing the traumatized victim with Academy Award precision. She clutched a tissue to her chest, her voice trembling as she described his violent threats and delusional accusations. He keeps insisting I'm some kind of serial killer, she told Officer Martinez. He showed me these fake newspaper articles he's created about me murdering my previous neighbors. It's terrifying how detailed his fantasy has become. Martinez nodded sympathetically. We'll get him the help he needs. Psychiatric evaluation, medication management. The system will take care of him. David watched from the car as Karen's performance continued. But this time, he wasn't focused on her lies. He was watching the small red light blinking in his former living room window. The camera was still recording, still uploading to the cloud server that only he knew about. Still capturing every word of Karen's victim act. At the station, David was processed for the second time in a week. Breaking and entering, criminal trespass, stalking, terrorist threats. The charges kept piling up like snow in a blizzard. This time we're recommending psychiatric hold, Martinez told him. 72 hours minimum, possibly longer depending on evaluation. I understand, David said calmly. Martinez frowned. He'd been expecting protests, rage, desperate pleas. Instead, David sat in the interrogation room with an almost serene expression. You understand you're looking at serious jail time here. Even if you plead mental illness, you'll be institutionalized for years. I understand. And you're okay with that? David leaned forward. Officer Martinez, can I ask you something? Sure. How long have you been working this neighborhood? About 15 years. Why? Ever notice a pattern with domestic disturbances on Maple Street? Martinez's frown deepened. What kind of pattern? Middle-aged men having breakdowns. Always involving one particular address. David's voice was steady, conversational. Always the same story, property disputes that escalate to harassment charges. Mr. Chen, I think you should stop talking until your lawyer gets here. My lawyer can't afford me anymore. But that's okay. I won't need him much longer. David sat back in his chair. Tell me about Mrs. Henderson. The guy who lived in my house before me. Martinez's hand paused over his notepad. How do you know about Henderson? Because he went through the same thing I did. Started with property line disputes with Karen Morrison. Ended with him being arrested for harassment. And then what happened to him? He moved away. Sold the house. To whom? Martinez was quiet for a long moment. To Mrs. Morrison. For how much? I don't see how that's, humor me. Below market value. Significantly below market value. David nodded. And before Henderson, there was Thompson. Same pattern. Same outcome. Same buyer. He leaned forward again. How many men has Karen Morrison driven out of that neighborhood, Officer Martinez? That's enough. Martinez stood up. You're going to County General for psychiatric evaluation. Doctor will see you in the morning. Check the cloud server. David said as Martinez headed for the door. What? My security system uploads to a cloud server. Account name is David Chen 2003, password is Sarah's birthday, May 15, 1995. Everything that happened tonight is on there. Martinez paused with his hand on the doorknob. Mr. Chen, if you have evidence that supports your version of events, why didn't you mention it earlier? Because I needed Karen to think she'd won completely. I needed her to get cocky and make a mistake. David's smile was cold. Check the timestamp on tonight's footage. Check what she said when she thought no one was listening. Even if this footage exists, breaking into someone's house is still a crime. But conspiracy to commit fraud isn't. Identity theft isn't. And systematic harassment designed to force property sales, that's racketeering. David's eyes never left Martinez's face. How much do you think my house is really worth, officer? How much profit do you think Karen made on all those below-market purchases? Martinez left without another word. David spent the night in a holding cell, staring at the ceiling and waiting. At 6 a.m., Marcus arrived with a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. David, what the hell is going on? Marcus's face was haggard. They are saying you broke into Karen's house, threatened to kill her. Did you check the cloud server? What cloud server? David gave him the login information. Everything's there. Her confession, her explanation of how she's been manipulating me, the whole scheme. The public defender looked skeptical. Mr. Chen, even if such recordings exist, they might not be admissible in court. Depending on consent laws, she was recording too, David interrupted. She consented to being recorded the moment she pulled out her own device. Marcus was already on his phone, logging into the cloud account. His face went white as he watched the footage. Jesus Christ, he whispered. She actually admits to faking the newspaper articles. She admits to manipulating you into thinking she was a serial killer. Keep watching. Marcus fast-forwarded through the recording. His eyes widened as Karen explained her real estate scheme, her systematic targeting of isolated men, her methods for driving them to psychological breaks. This is evidence of multiple felonies. Which is why I needed her to say it out loud. David turned to the public defender. How long before this gets to the right people? If it's as incriminating as your brother says. Detective work takes time, but with clear evidence of fraud. The lawyer paused. Could be days. Could be hours. It was 3 hours. David was eating lunch in his cell when the commotion started. Raised voices in the hallway, rapid footsteps, the sound of multiple officers moving with purpose. Through the small window in his cell door, he could see uniformed police escorting someone in handcuffs down the corridor. Karen Morrison no longer looked like a victim. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her silk blouse wrinkled and stained. The mask of wounded innocence had been stripped away, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. This is harassment, she shouted as they passed David's cell. That recording was obtained illegally. You can't use it. She spotted David through the window and stopped struggling. For a moment, they stared at each other through the reinforced glass. You think you've won, she said quietly. But you have no idea what you've started. I started nothing, David replied. I finished it. Karen's smile returned, sharp and dangerous. My lawyers will have me out by tonight. And when they do, I'm going to destroy you so completely that you'll beg me to put you out of your misery. Your lawyers are going to be busy, David said. Turns out the FBI is very interested in real estate fraud schemes that cross state lines. Something about RICO violations. Karen's face went dead white. Did you really think you were the only one doing research? David pressed his face against the glass. Took me exactly one phone call to the Phoenix field office. Amazing how helpful federal agents become when you hand them evidence of interstate criminal enterprise. You're bluffing. Agent Sarah Chen sends her regards. The blood drained from Karen's face completely. Your daughter? My daughter, the FBI financial crimes investigator. The one you thought never called me. David's smile was razor-sharp. She's been working white-collar crime for 3 years. Real estate fraud is her specialty. Karen's knees buckled. The officers had to support her as the full implications hit home. Sarah's been building a case against you for months, David continued. Ever since I first mentioned my neighbor problems. She told me to document everything, record everything, gather as much evidence as possible. The security cameras were her idea. Along with the concrete trap, the arrest, everything. That happened afterward. We needed you to feel completely in control so you'd get sloppy and reveal the full scope of your operation. Karen was shaking now, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. No. No, you're too stupid. You're just a failed accountant who couldn't handle being outmaneuvered by a federal law enforcement officer who's been playing you from day one. David's laugh was genuine for the first time in months. Karen, you didn't outmaneuver me. You walked straight into the most elaborate sting operation in Phoenix field office history. The officers started moving again, dragging Karen down the hallway. Her threats and protests echoed off the concrete walls, growing fainter with each step. David sat back on his narrow bunk, feeling lighter than he had in years. His phone, returned by the officers, buzzed with a text from Sarah, package delivered. Time to come home, Dad. An hour later, all charges against David Chen were dropped. The charges against Karen Morrison filled 6 pages. But as David walked out of the police station into the warm afternoon sun, he couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's final words had been more than just empty threats. She'd said he had no idea what he'd started. And despite everything, despite the evidence, the arrests, the federal investigation, David found himself wondering if Karen Morrison had one more card left to play. The thought followed him all the way home to Maple Street, where his house keys worked perfectly and his belongings sat exactly where they belonged. Where everything was back to normal. Too normal. As if someone had been expecting him to return all along. It was slipped under his front door while he slept, written on expensive stationery in Karen's precise handwriting. No postmark, no envelope, just a single sheet of cream-colored paper that made his blood freeze. David, congratulations on your victory. The FBI sting was truly masterful. I especially admired the way you played the broken, desperate neighbor so convincingly. Your daughter should be proud. By the time you read this, I'll be dead. But before I go, there's something you should know about your precious Sarah. Something the FBI doesn't want you to discover. Check the basement. Love and kisses, Karen. P.S. Tell Sarah that Caroline Morrison says hello. David's hands shook as he read the letter twice, then 3 times. Caroline Morrison. Not Karen. Caroline. The basement door stood slightly ajar. David grabbed a flashlight and descended the wooden steps, his heart hammering against his ribs. The basement looked exactly as it always had: concrete walls, furnace humming in the corner, storage shelves lined with Christmas decorations and old photo albums. But there was something new. A manila folder sat on his workbench, thick with documents. David opened it and felt his world tilt off its axis. Birth certificates. Social security records. School transcripts. A complete paper trail for one Sarah Chen, born May 15, 1995, to David Chen and Margaret Chen. Except Margaret Chen had never existed. And the real Sarah Chen had died in a car accident when she was 3 years old. David's legs gave out. He collapsed onto a storage crate, the folder spilling its contents across the concrete floor. 20 years of fake documents. 20 years of fabricated memories. 20 years of a daughter who had never been his daughter at all. His phone rang. Sarah's number. Dad. I heard about the letter. Are you okay? Who are you? David's voice was barely a whisper. Silence on the other end of the line. Dad. Your real name. Tell me your real name. More silence. Then, in a voice David had never heard before, Caroline Morrison. The phone slipped from David's numb fingers, clattering across the concrete. Everything made sense now. The perfect timing of the FBI investigation. Sarah's convenient expertise in financial crimes. The way she'd known exactly how to manipulate Karen into revealing her scheme. Because Sarah was Karen. Had always been Karen. David crawled across the floor, picking up scattered documents. Photos of a little girl who looked nothing like him. Medical records for treatments he'd never authorized. Report cards from schools he'd never visited. 20 years of his life, built on a foundation of lies. The basement door slammed shut above him. David scrambled up the stairs, throwing his weight against the door. It didn't budge. The sound of a deadbolt sliding home echoed through the wood. Sarah, he shouted. Caroline. Whatever your name is. Footsteps crossed the floor above his head, moving with familiar purpose. David heard drawers opening, papers rustling. Then the distinctive sound of liquid being poured. Gasoline. You were supposed to be easy, Caroline's voice came from directly above him, muffled by the floorboards. Lonely widower, no family, perfect target for a long-term manipulation. But you had to be difficult. David threw himself against the door again. The wood splintered but held. 20 years I spent building the perfect daughter. 20 years of birthday calls and Christmas visits and Father's Day cards. Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to love someone you despise? The smell of gasoline was getting stronger. But it was worth it. Every fake smile, every fabricated memory, every "I love you, Dad" that made me want to vomit. Because it gave me the perfect cover for the perfect crime. David found a crowbar on his workbench and attacked the door with desperate fury. The wood began to give way. The FBI investigation was real, you know. I really am Agent Sarah Chen. Took me years to establish that identity, work my way up through the ranks. Amazing what you can accomplish when you have unlimited time and resources. The deadbolt tore free. David burst through the door into his kitchen and stopped cold. Caroline stood in the center of the room, no longer bothering to look like his daughter. Her hair was different, darker, shorter. Her clothes were different. Even her posture was different, predatory and confident in a way Sarah had never been. She held a lit cigarette in one hand and a gasoline can in the other. "Hello, Daddy." "Why?" David's voice cracked. 20 years. Why pretend to be my daughter? For 20 years. Because I needed a long-term cover identity. And because you killed my mother. David stared at her. What? Margaret Morrison. My real mother. You killed her 23 years ago. I've never killed anyone in my life. Haven't you? Caroline's smile was cold. December 15th. 2002, icy roads on Highway 34. You were driving home from your Christmas party, 3 drinks over the legal limit. The blood drained from David's face. She was walking to her car after her shift at the diner. Minimum wage job, trying to support a 5-year-old daughter. And you hit her going 60 miles an hour. That was an accident. I never meant. You left her to die in a ditch. Never stopped, never called for help. Just drove home and pretended it never happened. David's knees buckled. How do you know about that? Because I've been planning this for 23 years. Ever since. They found her body and told me my mommy was never coming home. Caroline's voice turned sing-song, mocking. I was 5 years old, Daddy. Do you know what it's like to lose your mother when you're 5? I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I was young and stupid and scared, sorry doesn't bring her back. Caroline flicked ash onto the gasoline-soaked floor. But revenge. Revenge is satisfying. The house, the neighbors, Karen Morrison, all real. I needed to establish a pattern, create a believable cover story for why I was targeting you specifically. The other men I drove away. They are fine. Living comfortable lives on my dime, happy to play along with the charade. David looked around. The kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. His home, violated by 20 years of lies. His memories, poisoned by the knowledge that every shared moment had been a performance. You destroyed my life. I gave you a life. Caroline's mask slipped, revealing something raw and broken underneath. You think you deserved a daughter after what you did? You think you deserved happiness? I paid for what I did. I went to therapy, I quit drinking, you never paid. The police never caught you. You never faced justice. You got to go on living while my mother rotted in the ground. Caroline dropped the cigarette. The gasoline ignited with a whoosh that sucked all the oxygen from the room. Flames raced across the floor in perfect lines, following the trail Caroline had poured throughout the house. But now you get to burn, she said, backing toward the door. Just like my mother burned when the friction from your car set her clothes on fire. Wait. David lunged forward, but Caroline was already outside. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. She pulled out her FBI credentials, studying them with mock sadness. Such a shame. Agent Sarah Chen died trying to save her father from a house fire. Very tragic. Very heroic. Caroline, please, my name is Sarah now. Sarah Chen, devoted daughter and federal agent. Caroline Morrison died 23 years ago with her mother. The flames were spreading faster now, climbing the walls, consuming everything David had built. Smoke filled his lungs, making him cough and gag. I'll tell everyone, he gasped. About who you really are, about what you did, who's going to believe you? A man having a psychotic break, making wild accusations about his dead daughter being an imposter. Sarah laughed. They'll think the smoke inhalation made you delusional. David stumbled toward the door, but Sarah was blocking his path. Behind her, he could see neighbors gathering on the street, their faces illuminated by the growing fire. Move, he rasped. I don't think so. David feinted left, then dove right, tackling Sarah around the waist. They crashed through the doorway onto the front lawn, rolling across the grass in a tangle of limbs. Sarah was stronger than she looked, and younger, and desperate. She clawed at his face, drove her knee into his ribs, fought with the fury of someone who'd waited 23 years for this moment. But David was fighting for his life. He pinned her arms, ignoring the sirens that were getting closer, ignoring the flames that were now visible through every window of his house. It's over, he panted. Whatever you are, whoever you are, it's over. Sarah looked up at him, and for just a moment, her mask slipped completely. Underneath the federal agent, underneath the dutiful daughter, underneath 20 years of careful lies, David saw a broken 5-year-old girl who just wanted her mother back. It'll never be over, she whispered. Not for me. The fire department arrived as David's house collapsed into itself, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky like dying stars. The paramedics found David and Sarah on the lawn, both suffering from smoke inhalation and minor injuries. The official report would state that Agent Sarah Chen had bravely attempted to rescue her father from an accidental house fire, likely caused by faulty electrical wiring. A tragic end to an already difficult week for the Chen family. David would survive the fire, the investigation, and the media attention. He would eventually move to a small apartment across town, where he would spend his remaining years trying to separate real memories from manufactured ones. Sarah would return to her job with the FBI, where she would continue investigating financial crimes with the same methodical precision she